Larry, what would you say if I came out on stage with you?
That'd be fine. What would happen? What would happen?
That would be fine.
What would happen if that turned around?
Yeah.
And I'd say, okay,
Wait,
Rita, thanks
you
for
asked
being
me
here.
questions?
Yeah, now what, Rita? What's going on? Rita, tell me about Moses on Mount Nebo. And you just see this deer in the headlights look like,
Yep.
I have no idea.
What would you do if I just started making things up, though? If I was just fully confident, I was like, well, Moses went to Mount Elbow and said blah, blah. What would you do? Would you stop me or would you let me go?
I probably would interrupt you with my laughter.
Okay.
Average age attention span for adult is 22 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can shift their attention, we can engage them better.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone walks out of there with a better understanding of what was said and their mind was not wandering half the time, I think we do better.
Yeah.
So this is an attempt to try to help people transition from, rather than one person standing up there talking for 25 or 30 minutes, to be able to shift the attention back to a moderator or back to someone who's asking questions, back to, or however it goes. I think it's a better, it's more interesting, and I think it could have the same dynamic. So I'm looking forward to it. We've been talking about this for a long time, and we're going to launch it this weekend and see how it goes. I'm not going to be here forever, and it'd be nice to be able to create a greater longevity for me in doing this style, so it really benefits me as much as anyone, and also keeps the congregation engaged with some young speakers that I'd like to bring in, to where, maybe I'm on the stage with them and we're having a dialogue, or you're on the stage with them, or whatever. But I think it's trying to be honest, completely honest about the needs of the future. Mm-hmm. Let's do what we think is best for the congregation.
I'm all in. I'm ready. Before we start, though, can I tell a Larry story?
Sure.
Okay. So I actually found out this was almost 10 years ago that this happened. And I was actually struggling with the loss of a friend, and I did not know how to process it. It was kind of the first time that a big tragedy really hit me, and I was feeling scared and confused, and I just needed to talk to somebody. And I didn't really know you at the time. I had come here a few times with my family, but you did remember my name every time I came. And I thought, he just seems like he's a caring person. And I didn't know exactly what you were going to say about the situation, but all I remember was compassion and this message of hope. And that is something that I have seen consistently in Pastor Larry since day one. He is always an optimist. He always gives a message of hope. And I am you guys, seriously, it's amazing to have a pastor that practices what he preaches. So thanks for letting me share the stage with you today.
It's my privilege. So, and for that wonderful story, I'm going to give you my son.
Thank you.
Well, they've been married. This is my daughter-in-law. She's been married to my son for 3 years, and very much part of our family. And Rita, thank you so much for sharing the stage with me today. But as we begin to talk about this, and we've talked extensively, after we get through a series like Journey, and you've enjoyed the Journey songs, the band does a great job, but what do we do to follow that up? So now what? That's the right question. So now what? What do we think?
Well, what I like to do with stories is I try to put myself into it to see if I can understand it from all angles. And when I did that with Moses, I was like, I don't think that I would choose to be this character, because he spent his whole life, they're wandering around, he's leading these people to go try to find home, their land, the promised land. And they make it so close, and he can see it from across the way, but he doesn't make it in. So I'm like, what was that all about? Why? Why did he make it so far and then not get to make it in?
Well, I think that's a good question. But the answer is, I don't know. No.
And that's it. Goodbye.
We're done. Thanks for coming. I think the answer is that there is an answer that said at one point that when he said, speak to the rock and get water from the rock, and he hit the rock, that because that was one excuse, because you did that, you're not going to be able to go in. But I think the other answer is, hey, the guy's been working at this job for a long time. He's 120 years old. At 120 years old, it's time to step through the river and begin to do all these conquests, and it's time for somebody younger maybe to be able to take care of that. So Moses is 120 years old. They said he made it to Mount Nebo, which is not elbow, but Mount Nebo, and which is in Jordan, and you see the mountains. And this year, I was on Mount Nebo, and it's 2,300 feet above sea level, but you're looking over the Dead Sea, which is 1,400 feet below sea level. So you're looking down 3,700 feet to give you an idea of the expanse of that. And what Moses saw was all the promised land. But even on the east side of the Jordan, there was a couple of tribes, actually 3 tribes, that settled not on the other side, but on this side. They had to go fight the wars and then come back and settle. But so where he was buried, supposedly on Mount Nebo, so he could have this spectacular view. And what a great send-off. I mean, it doesn't tell us where he died or how he died, just that they buried him somewhere up there on Mount Nebo, looking over the great place of the Promised Land. So I think it's served his time. He did very well.
Can we go back to the rock thing real quick?
Yeah.
What happened? He struck a rock and then
they were thirsty. And one of the stories is they were thirsty, and God commanded him, hey, go speak to the rock and tell it to give forth water. And Moses was a little annoyed at the people, so it said he just went up and hit the rock. And he didn't quite follow the rules, so because of that, he's going to be punished and not go in there. But that was one of the explanations. People have lots of explanations for a lot of things that happen, right? And that's just one. So I think the explanation is, hey, you're old and you're about to die. This is the time for you to just have your send-off party without going into another battle.
Right.
So I think if I were Moses, I'd say, leave me on Mount Nebo. Don't take me any farther. I've come farther. I've been leading these people for 40 years. They're grumbling, whining. They're people that... Do you know people like that? Yeah, you work with them. You have families. You live with them.
Maybe you are one.
Yeah, if you don't know any, it's because you are one. But people often grumble and complain, and Moses had led them for a long time. They wanted to kill him at times. And at some point, he finally got them to where he wanted them to be, and this is where it ends. Not everyone gets to go all the way through multi-generations and do everything. We all have a season of life. Fulfill your season, fulfill your purpose, and I think he did that very well.
And then we have Joshua, who takes over. And I love the history that Joshua has with this whole thing, that there were 40 years that he spent basically preparing for taking over and leading the people. So will you kind of talk about that transition between Moses and Joshua?
Yeah, and in the Journey series, we stay in Exodus, but the other books are Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in Numbers, there's a story of where Joshua and Caleb are 2 spies, and there are 10 others. They're sent across the Jordan River to spy out the land. And 10 of the 12 come back and say, the 10 of the guys who are older and more seasoned said, there are giants there. We should not go in. Our recommendation is, no, we'll be obliterated. We'll be annihilated. We shouldn't do it. And Joshua and Caleb came back, the young guys. They said, hey, we're voting thumbs up. Let's go do this. We think this is ours. If God is with us, nothing can go against us. Let's go in and do it. And the people go, oh. Don't listen to the young guys. You know what the consequence was? Then they left the river by the promised land, and they had to travel 40 years more till they come back around the circle. They took the long way around till they're back to the Jordan River again. This time, that whole generation had died off. All those 10 had died off. There were 2 young guys then, but now seasoned veterans now, Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua takes the mantle or the staff, the leadership from Moses, and leads them to the promised land.
And in order to claim the land, to own it, they did something interesting. What was that?
Well, and I'll give you some points in your hand today. We're not going to fill in the blanks, but really, to own the land, they had to walk the dimensions of it. And according to this ancient culture, to own land, you had to know the boundaries. And Abraham, hundreds of years before, God said, walk the length and the width of the land. And when you walk the land, then you'll own it. He says, every place you put your foot will be yours. But if you're not willing to walk it, it probably will not. So you have a little bit of obligation there. And that's something that's still used today in surveying. And there's some surveyors, there's a company, some family members that come here that belong to a surveying company, and they survey the dimensions of the land. Suncoast has land. We have 81 acres, and it's been surveyed. There are corners. I can take you to show you the corners. But I would challenge, and I could be wrong, but I don't think so, that there's one person in this building that's walked the dimensions of this land, and that's me. So why did you do it? Because I wanted to walk the dimensions. I walked the front, no problem. Walk the sides, no problem. But to walk this back property line, there's a wetland, a swamp. For me to walk it, I was walking in water over knee deep. I mean, snakes, you hear alligators. I mean, what person in their right mind would do that?
That's the right question.
Just me. And we all know about my right mind. It left me a long time ago. But I've walked the dimensions of the land. Have you walked it twice? No, you. I'm crazy, just not that crazy. It's very rough. But when you walk it, it seems like then you can own it. And that's important.
And it seems like there is responsibility that is tacked on. So when you're renting something, something breaks, you're not the owner. You don't have to worry about it. You just call up the landlord. But when you own it, you take care of it. You see what is you see the potential and what could happen on this land. And that is something that you did with Suncoast. You said, I want this piece to do whatever I want with it. And why do you think that is still true today? Why do you think we look at these Bible stories and it says this ownership of the land, that was what these people were traveling and wandering for. They wanted a place to call home. What is the significance of that?
Well, I think that they'd been nomads. They're called Bedouin, which means they're shepherds. They travel from place to place. They've been run out of places that someone else owned. They've been in Egypt for 400 years. They didn't have any place to call their own. If you fast forward to the 20th century, you see the Nazi Germany, to where Israel was no longer a country in AD 70. So for basically over 1900 years, about 1900 years, they had no homeland. And what happened in the Holocaust was atrocious. And after that, Britain and America got together and said, we think that the Jewish nation needs to reestablish their home front. They have no land. They have no place to call their home. They were persecuted by these other countries and killed by the millions. So they were given Israel. And I think now they own the land and they have their homeland. There's something positive, not all positives about owning land, but there's something very positive about owning a home and owning some land. And if you own a home, you know that you're a homeowner. It's a wonderful thing. If you rent, guess what? It's not all bad to be a renter. You know, when something breaks, you call the landlord. When something breaks at your house, you own it, you are the landlord. And it's problematic. But it also gives you some possibilities. But it's, you know, but I would suggest that none of us truly own any land. 100 years from now, you're going to own it? Most of us 30 years from now. You'll move somewhere else. We're all just nomadic in some place. We're moving from here to here in our life. And for a short period of time, we own this parcel or that parcel. I've been fortunate to own homes in a variety of places, and I don't own them now, and I don't regret not owning them. I'm going, hallelujah, I don't own them.
Well, you do have a fun story about this.
Yeah, Becky and I bought our first home in Kansas City in 1978 or 79, and I paid $25,500 for this home. Can you imagine?
That's like a car.
Home. Yeah, it's like a car, and but you couldn't drive it. But we owned this home. We fixed it up a little bit, and in 1981, December of 81, it was time to leave Kansas City. I'd finished my schooling. I was ready to leave seminary and go into the pastorate. And I accepted a pastorate in Lake City, Florida. We were moving there, and as we did, we put our house on the market, but it wouldn't sell. One of the problems of home ownership. When you want to sell it and it doesn't sell, guess what? No one lives there. You still have to make the mortgage. So I had to pay the $252.50 a month. So that's not much money. It is. That was half my income in a month, pastoring. Did not make a lot of money. We moved from there, and a friend of mine, Larry Atkinson, said, it didn't sell, but don't worry, I will rent it for you. I will help you. And he did try in January, tried in February. In February, I got a call and said, Larry, he said, my wife is 9 months pregnant. We're about to have a baby. I tried to show your house. People don't show up. They're irresponsible. He said, I took an ad out in the newspaper to rent it. For those of you who don't know, newspapers, something about this big, folds up. You know, we used to get those regularly delivered to our houses. But he said, I put an ad in the paper, And, and we had 11 inches of snow. And the day I was to go show the house, they didn't show up. I fought my way through the snow. I got there, and he said, Larry, could you just get somebody else? And I said, no problem. He's a friend of mine. It's too onerous. It was too much of a burden I'd ask of him. I said, no problem. I understand. Thank you for all you've done. You're released. And I got off the phone and looked at my wife, who is, we have one little baby at home, and we make no income, and we had this house payment that got to be made. That's ownership. So what do? She started to get a little nervous. I said, look, sweetie, can we just take a day, one day, and just see what happens? I just don't want to panic. I don't want to worry about it. And we said a prayer and just gave it to God for a day. The next day, the phone rang. It was Larry Atkinson. He said, hey, good news. The people that stood me up yesterday, they called and said they drove by the house, they wanted it, and they rented it for 3 years. And ultimately, we sold it and made a nice profit on it. So there's good things and bad things about ownership. So, but what I do know is that when you have something and you don't know what to do, don't overreact. Don't panic. Trust God. That's the important message today.
I think that leads us to point number 2. To become more often requires strength and courage. So what was it about Joshua that made him able to take these people into the next step? Was he a warrior? Was he stronger and more courageous than the other people? What kind of character was he?
I think he was a warrior. He was bold, but he was also a man of God. And but I do think when you look at this passage, and let me let you have some insight. When it says be strong and courageous, it's probably because they weren't. But here's what's amazing. He says it in verse 6, verse 7, verse 9, and verse 18. If someone keeps telling you over repeatedly, be strong and courageous, it's because they're trying to speak into your life. They're saying, hey, there's going to be some things. And then the other verses that will help you. I will never leave you nor forsake you, the last one. Do not be terrified or discouraged. Why would somebody tell me not to be terrified? Because I'm terrified. And these are great life lessons for us. Because living this life, sometimes there are obstacles that come up to us that just, they frighten us. And we are terrified. And some circumstances in people's lives they're horrific, and they are terrified. I remember just recently I had a story of someone who's going through some issues with some health, and I was talking to my daughter, and I said, yeah, this is what's going on. I said, but it's not the end of the world. And she said, you just, Dad, you minimize everything. You just downplay it. This is serious. I said, no, sweetie, I want you to know I try to see through open eyes, but I see things without overreacting. See, I deal in this world as pastor. You may not believe this, but I have people in my congregation that overreact. Can you imagine? Not you. I see some of you are overreacting right now. I can't believe he'd say that. But I have family members that overreact. There are times that there are probably times that all of us have overreacted. But in my life of seasoning, that's a good word, I've learned that overreacting is not my best thing. Taking a deep breath and trusting God in the process. And I should not be terrified. Why? Because the Lord, my God, is with me. And if he is with me, why should I panic about the things of life? Does everything go well in my life? Of course not. I mean, there are times that things fall apart. I talked to someone today, their teenage daughter was driving, she had an accident, totaled their car. That's significant. I care, but I don't want to start screaming and running out and overreacting.
Right. So I think what's really cool about courage is that it's not necessarily being strong and not having fear. It's when you are terrified, you see the reality of the situation and you choose to be courageous. It's something that happens even when you're feeling fearful. And being an optimist is not blindly looking at life as, it's rainbows and butterflies. It's saying, I see that it could be bad. I see that it is bad. And that is something that just comes with life. But to look at it in a way that says, what's going to serve me better? Do I need to worry about all these things that maybe I should be worried about?
Right.
Or is there a better way to live? Is there a better story I could tell, which is it's okay. It will turn out. And I feel like you really do bring that to a lot of people. Anybody who ever interacts with you, you do bring that calm, the peace, and the hopeful message.
Yeah, and I've been in circumstances where it's not been there. I've been in circumstances where all hell is broken loose. I mean, I've been there to where really it's been so much chaos, and I've been in circumstances where people are screaming, and you say, really? Yes, I've been in church for some of the most insignificant, ridiculous reasons. That in my first pastorate, quick story, it's not in our notes, but quick story. When my first pastor, I'm 25 years old, I talked to a young couple about too much public display of affection in the church. There's only 25 people, and she's about sitting in his lap. So I go and say, I'm teaching a class there in a Sunday school class. I say, hey, you guys are good. I know you love each other. Only 25. I understand this, but could we just have enough room where just this much between you? And he goes, oh, no problem. It's fine. And they're understanding, no big deal. I said, phew. I opened the door to my office, and her mother's standing there. What's going on? I said, I just have a talk to him about some things. Like what? I said, really, it's just between us. Well, I want to know. I'm her mother. I want to know. She's 18 years old. Her name is Darla McKinney.
You just called her up by name.
I know. But she's no longer alive.
Okay.
She's dead. Killed her off.
I don't know how that
ago.
made it better.
But here's what happened. Yeah, call him by name. I hope you're watching this. This is what it did to me. When I said that, she threw up both her hands and screamed at the top of her lungs and ran all the way down the hallway and out the door. And I stood there as a young 25-year-old pastor. My mouth dropped open. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I mean, be strong and courageous. I was terrified. I don't even remember what I said that day. I went back in and asked the usher to go there's only 20 people there. Go get Jim. Jim, I think I offended your wife. And you go, do people overreact? Of course they do. Have you ever overreacted?
Oh, yeah.
I have too. And the thing is, when that happens, we need to bring a sense of calm in our lives and realize that God is with us. Our tendency is to overreact. Our relationship with God says, trust me. Don't be that way. Take a deep breath. But you don't understand, I work in construction. You don't understand, I'm married. You don't understand, I have a bunch of kids. I know. But it's a better way to live your life. Strong and courageous, God is with you. Don't overreact. That makes sense? So, that works for me.
You do have another great story about dealing with some people and you being strong and courageous in your life. Will you tell that?
Yeah. This was 21 years ago when I left pastoring because I was just so burnt out from people. And maybe this was an overreaction, but I left because I didn't want to do it anymore. And I moved to Tallahassee. I was in mobile home sales, and this couple came to my office, and they wanted to buy a mobile home, but they could not because their credit was poor. And their credit was poor because they had a son who had a horrific accident, and the parents did what parents do. They stayed at the hospital with their kid. They did everything they could, and in so doing, they weren't working, and they didn't have enough money to pay their bills. So there's a season in their life where they got behind on their bills. Now, they eventually caught up, and they wanted to buy a nice home, and they could not. The bank refused them. So I got on the phone and talked to the vice president of the bank and said, I really want you to reconsider this. This is a good family. I mean, they had one hiccup, and if you can explain it, usually they'll do something. They said, no, we're not going to do it. And I went back in and I said, I'm so sorry. I went to bat for you, and I just couldn't get it done. And they were just both weeping. And I felt so sad for them. Good people. I said, here, let me pray with you. Is that okay? And I kind of pulled them in together, and we had a prayer together. And I asked God to help them see that this is not the end. It's just a hiccup in their life, and to trust Him. And when it was all over, I said, I was a pastor before I did this. And they said, we know. And I went, and my mind started racing. How do they know? What was it? So I finally said, well, what was it? What let you know I was a pastor? And in my mind, I'm thinking, is it my Jesus persona? Is it my halo that I have that I can put on? I was wearing it in that moment. What was it? Or maybe just the prayer, what was it? And I thought, well, this is my Christ-like spirit. They said, no, you still have your old business card on your briefcase. We read that when you were out of the office. So it's kind of one of those come to Jesus meetings for me. It's not about your attitude, but something happened there for me that helped me realize my life is not about sales, and there's nothing wrong with sales, but that's not what I'm about. I'm about helping people get through the crisis of life and find more about God and trust Him, because He's very much alive and capable to help them in your daily life. And that was a story that really helped me. And it's funny too, because I'm not quite so spiritual as I thought I was, but it's about helping others, and I think that's what I'm about.
Well, that's what kind of started your vision for Suncoast. That's what made you think this is what I'm meant to do.
Exactly. And that was when the seeds were just starting to germinate. I hadn't made the decision at that point, but at that point I was beginning to have this disconnect and realize, the crazy people that I pastored, that I left, it wasn't about them. They're just people. It was a system that was more frustrating to me. And as I become more mature and begin to see with both eyes open, I realize this is what I really need to do. And I want to let you know, Suncoast was formed the greatest single decision I've made in my life. Several. Finding Christ, following Him, marrying the girl of my dreams, and starting Suncoast Community Church. And you're a part of that. Thank you for being a part of that. It's a great thing.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you did. So point number 3, when I first read this, I had a whole nother idea in my head, but I love your explanation of it. Rest is an essential part of becoming more. Do you mean sleeping, getting 8 hours, sleeping, you wake up in the morning and you feel refreshed? What do you mean by rest?
Well, that is one concept of rest, and I do recommend you get 8 hours of sleep a night. Science says it's good for you, but it's not what it means in this passage. This is a rest that's so much deeper. It's a rest that's really tied to the Hebrew word shalom. It means peace. When you enter the land, you'll find the rest of God. It's being in the place in your life where you know you're doing what you're called to do. If you're a physician and you love being a doctor, it's where you should be. If you're an attorney, that's what you love to be, it's right. If you're a mom and you realize that motherhood is a great thing, it must be because your children are older. So there's different places but the rest is realization. This is where I should be. I'm in the right place at the right time. And that's a good rest. And that's the kind of rest that you can come home fatigued after working a 12-hour day and you just be absolutely exhausted, but in your soul you realize, I have found contentment and peace and rest. And that comes, my friends, from a God who lives around you, not up in the clouds somewhere, but in every breath you breathe. He's that close. And He energizes us. He lives with us. He gives us that spark of life to be more than what we are. And we follow Him. We follow Jesus because He's the one that showed us how to do it. So that rest is the rest that Christ gives to me. And I'm so grateful for that.
So is that kind of what is going to be about, is those times that you kind of arrive at that place in life where maybe it was a huge goal that you worked 10 years and you finally arrive there, and then it's kind of, do I just do this forever? Now what? Do I find a new goal? So are we going to have some practical ways to apply this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be the fun of the whole journey. The series is that we talk about what's next. Because I've talked to a guy that sold a company and worth $50 million. He said, $50 million for my company. Now what? I talked to a guy who said, I've done in construction millions and millions of dollars worth. He has owned 2 foundations, but now what? What's the purpose? What can I do with my life? I think there's always something more for us that God has for us, because no one really ever retires or finishes working with God or for God.
So, now what? Closing story?
Sure.
That's my favorite part of any teaching. I love when Larry has his story, but this time we have a video to go along with it.
Perfect.
She did it 2 years ago. She did it when she was Brady's age. There you go. Woo! Wow. 1, 2, 3, jump.
Wow. I'm dead.
Pop's gonna jump. Maybe.
You don't have to, hon.
He's got something to prove. Yep. Woo! Nice.
Now, I want you to notice something. Did you see how long I stayed under? If you did not, if we were to play that again, you see the kids go down and come back up, down, and I go down and I'm under for over 3 seconds. Seems like a long time. What you did not see is that when I jumped and went underwater, my hands were up and I was wearing a swim shirt. As I went underwater, the swim shirt came over my head and tied my hands together. And I was underwater trying to figure out, how am I going to get this, how am I going to get out of this? But I'm a scuba diver, and I'm also a lifeguard, and I've also skydived, and I'm also a pastor, and I'm also 62 years old. What I've discovered is, don't panic. When you get in a circumstance where your hands are tied and you feel like, oh, what am I going to do? I could have just struggled underwater for a long time. I could have got myself in trouble. But the takeaway from what now is simply this. This week, there's going to be somebody. You're going to jump into some water somewhere. All of a sudden, a circumstance is going to happen, and you're going to feel like you can't get free, or something is binding you, or you're trapped. When that happens, I want you to take this card. Now what? Stay calm. Hold your breath. Usually I say take a deep breath. This time you're underwater, hold your breath. It'll be okay. What does that mean? Trust God, and you won't be disappointed. He loves you today. So do I. God bless you. Thanks for coming.